iPredict works by gathering the knowledge of its 5,000 plus traders. If a stock has a price of 57 cents, that means the market thinks that event has a 57% chance of happening. If you agree, you buy. If you disagree, you short. And if you're right, you make money.
Kia ora, good evening New Zealand. This is day 19 until the country goes to the polls. Welcome to iPredict Election 2011, the most accurate source of political and economic information in New Zealand broadcasting. Our three predictions tonight. Prediction 1. Despite showing us the money and highlighting government spin over Labour's costings, the market still shows the Labour Party vote flatlining at 30%. In the soundbite age, despite providing the substance, is style really enough to impress New Zealand voters? Prediction 2. After heavy trading across the weekend, the probability of Paul Goldsmith to win Epsom rose to 40%, then dropped to 35%. With Don Brash begging John Key to tell the good people of Epsom to vote for John Banks on breakfast last week, and landline polling suggesting Banks is a distant second, will the good people of Epsom do what they are told by head office? Prediction 3. The market is predicting that National have an 80% probability of winning in New Plymouth. Has the market got it wrong, and is this the best short on iPredict with a strong candidate in Andrew Little? To dissect these predictions, let me introduce tonight's panel. Here's the smartest guy in the Labour Party room, number cruncher extraordinaire, and maybe one of the few politicians with IQ above 50, Labour's David Parker. And here's the NBR's political columnist, moral shepherd of the right, Matthew Hooton. Welcome to you both. We'll also wrap the show with a final prediction, but let's kick things off with tonight's first market prediction. John Key's quip of "show me the money" seemed to impress the mainstream media in the same way children are impressed by Santa Claus. After not only showing New Zealand where the money is and also highlighting National's spin at overblowing Labour's numbers, the market is still predicting a Labour Party share of only 30%. David, National were deceptive about gross debt, included Cullen's super fund, ignored the 869 million dividends from SOEs, wrongly added 530 million for transport policies, overstated Labour's research and development tax credits, and overstated the early childhood and education policy by $1 billion. We can all argue that that's spin, but how can Labour seriously suggest borrowing from China to invest in Wall Street will produce a guaranteed 2.5% return?
Well, even though the world has gone through the greatest recession since the Great Depression, since the Cullen Fund was set up, it's returned more than the cost of capital to the Crown. That's the first point I make. Secondly, how can the government ping us and Labour for assuming that it's going to have a return of higher than the cost of capital when their own predictions for their own budget, which includes the current account, the Cullen Fund, show that same prediction.
The exact same thing.
They've banked it themselves. They have banked in their own pre-fu numbers the assumption that from here on in, over time, the Cullen Fund will return 2.5% above the Crown's cost of finance.
Have you been disappointed by the mainstream media coverage? Because it seems to have just focused on that quip, held on to it, and no explanation of the details.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most of us would now say, well, we should have avoided that particular trap by producing our own numbers earlier. So there's some culpability on our part there. But I thought the most egregious of misrepresentations was what went down with the SOEs. The government, the National, have said that if they're re-elected into government, they will sell half of a number of the SOEs, and yet they've assumed they're going to get the same revenue from dividends and from other capital distributions.
And not producing those numbers, was that Cunliffe's fault? Whose fault, Gough or Cunliffe?
Oh no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. We could have produced them earlier. We didn't. We chose not to, and we've borne the consequences of that. But the reality is, National is saying we'll sell the SOEs. They haven't deducted any income from their future budgets as a consequence of owning half of those, and we're the ones that are criticised for estimating their mistake. That's a nonsense.
Matthew, Labour produced a comprehensive costings release, but in today's soundbite media, a quip stolen from a Tom Cruise movie seems to trump that. Is Key style over substance a political reality Labour just haven't gotten their heads around?
Well, I wouldn't even characterise it that way. What happened was Labour was doing well. Phil Gough held his own against John Key, which when you're the opposition leader, if you hold your own against the Prime Minister, that's a technical win. When in the TVNZ debate last Monday, National had shocking campaign launch, terrible TV ads. Things were looking good for Labour. And then what happened, there was this Wednesday night debate at the Press in Christchurch that was actually, I think, an excellent debate. It had more substance than the TVNZ one. And John Key made a series of allegations about Labour's costings, and Phil Gough couldn't answer them. Now, what Labor's doing in this campaign, and I think polling would suggest that Labor's probably chosen the right strategy, is they're saying that John Key's this sort of lightweight, smile and wave, doesn't have a plan, you know, more interested in the Women's Weekly and so forth than serious policy. And Labor's saying, we're the serious guys who have spent 3 years designing a policy, costing it all carefully. So for Gough then not to be able to answer John Key's attack was catastrophic for Labor's campaign.
But John Key's attack was just a slogan.
Well, no, it was more than that. What happened was he went through and said, you've promised this and that will cost X, and you know, Gough agreed, and then there's this and that's Y, and there's this, that adds up, but you haven't got any revenue side. And that was
a lot of commentators were noting that in that debate, Gough was not only holding his own, it was out ahead, it was going Gough's way, and then just this line. John Key pops it in, and it's because he has this casual relationship with the audience that people quite like.
But okay, let's say most charitably, let's say it was just a cheap debating trick that John Key used against Phil Gough, and then Phil Gough fell into it and made a total idiot of himself.
He should know better, shouldn't he?
Well, this guy wants to be Prime Minister. He's going to have to be involved in a government that would involve the Greens, possibly Winston Peters, Hone Harawira. He wants to represent us internationally as Prime Minister. I mean, he shouldn't fall for a cheap debating trick. I actually think it was worse than that. I think he was almost sabotaged by David Cummings. I mean, well, when you think about it,
look, we've
well,
shown you the money.
We've
shown you the money.
We've
shown you the money.
You haven't got
we have.
the money
we sure
because
have.
you've got.
Well, let's move on with two credit downgrades. With two credit downgrades, and
$17 billion was the
deficit.
accusation, and over half of that could be shown to be wrong with the Cullen Fund, the SOE money that wasn't properly counted, and the accusation that we hadn't funded the rail link.
But in today's soundbite media, a lot of people haven't noted that. They've just got the show me the money. So, but let me continue. With two credit downgrades and an $18 billion deficit, how did National's economic mismanagement suddenly get eclipsed by Labour's supposed economic incompetence? What's happened here?
Well, you know, I'm outraged. In fact, I thought the Herald in the weekend was terrible. The Herald in the weekend didn't just have the second Women's Weekly story about John Key in 2 days on the front page. In their analysis of the SOE dividends in the middle, they were criticising the Labour Party for the Labour Party's assertion, for the National Party's assertion about Labour Party's miscalculation, according to National, of the SOE revenue that they're going to lose. They still haven't produced their own numbers.
Is Stephen Joyce on the Herald editorial team these days? Yes or no?
Well,
maybe.
You'd wonder.
Labour's been outplayed here, haven't they?
Well,
Come on.
I mean, I think on that SOE dividend thing, there was a small error in Labour's calculation. Probably not material in the scheme of things. I mean, the government receives a certain amount of dividends from all its, $50 billion worth of SOEs, and Labour assumed if you sold half the shares in 4 of them, you'd halve the dividend stream. Well, that can't be right. But in the end, it's only a few $100 million each way, on that.
Even that's not right. We assumed in year one that they would lose a proportion of the $850 million in dividends that they got last year.
Right.
Well, that's what they got last year from those portion of the SOEs that are on the block for sale by National. So I don't even accept that proposition. And for us to get criticised on our estimation not being perfect when the National Party still haven't produced one as to what it is.
The National Party haven't produced one,
the National Party doesn't have to produce.
Well, they should because they've got a whole of the budget. No,
you've got a
their
treasury.
pre-fu was wrong. Why are we accountable for ours, but they're not accountable for theirs?
You've got a Treasury officer, in your. I think the worst thing in Labour's costings is one of the things they've done is they've assumed that if you borrow money from China, as you said, and invest it on Wall Street, you'll make a 2.5% profit each year. Now, perhaps that's fair enough. And what Labour's done is, and the government uses the same
thing. They've done the same thing, right.
Okay, so what Labour's done is it's built into its sort of profit and loss account that it's going to make this 2.5% each year.
As have National.
Which is fair enough, no problem. But what it hasn't done is then looked at the balance sheet. And what you have to do, if you're going to borrow $7 billion offshore to put into the Cullen Fund, you have to put that in as a liability in the balance sheet, and then the shares you're going to buy on Wall Street, you put them in as asset. For some reason, Labour's just decided it doesn't have to adjust the balance sheet. It's just going to assume the profit.
That's not right.
It is correct. You haven't included that debt in your balance sheet.
No, what National did is they pretended that the liability was there for the contribution to the Cullen Fund, but then didn't show the asset. And so we said, well, you should either be showing net debt, or if you're going to show gross debt, you should be showing the additional assets
Well, you should
as
show
well.
both.
Well,
but
you
Labor
should show both.
Labor hasn't shown either. Labor
No,
just says
we
we're
will
going to make two by investing on
But
Wall
neither
Street.
are national, surely.
Well, by investing on Wall
So
Street,
neither
we're going to
party
make 2.5% per year.
We have never pretended that you didn't have to borrow during the initial period in order to fund that contribution. What we've said, though, is that you have an asset to match it. What we want here is some honesty
Well, you might.
about the
You might lose it.
No, according to the government's own predictions that they have in their budget and their pre-food,
Well, it's
they're
amazing
predicting-
what confidence you've got on Wall Street.
Well,
Because
because
I
but
think
why can you ping us for that?
Well,
Not the same assumption
look,
that's being made
I
by
don't
National.
support the Cullen Fund. I don't support working.
I'm not asking you whether you support the Cullen Fund. I'm saying what's wrong with us using the same projection that the government's already using.
Because of what I said, you're claiming to be the responsible economic managers in
Well,
comparison to Smile and Wave.
We've got some
John
long-term
Key.
structural solutions
proposed
to our problems.
So to say that you're going to borrow $7 billion from China to put into Wall Street, and you're not going to account for that in your balance sheet.
No,
is
we didn't
ridiculous.
say that. No, that's
And the
your
fact-
assertion. That's
well,
not correct.
That is your policy.
No,
At
that's
30,
no,
well,
that's not correct.
at 30% party vote, we've got to move on. At 30% party
Yeah.
vote, would you buy this stock because Labor is stronger than that, or short it because Labor will melt down? Are you going to buy it, or are you going to short it?
Oh, hey, I'm going to buy it. Look, you look at what happened at the election of Len Brown. They had him 10 points.
That's right, more than 10 points.
10
more
points
than 10 points. 14
different,
points.
14
Yep,
points
14
different
points.
from the election outcome.
Yep, yep.
Well, here we are. I think we're looking at a similar situation here. I can't see that we're only 30% in the polls.
They got 34% last time, and that was against a tide to go running out on them. 200,000 Labor Party voters didn't vote in 2008. There was all of that hoo-ha with Winston. There was a lot of dirt, a lot of people going, Ellen, they got 34% last time. You saying Labor will get under 34?
Oh yeah, I think this is a short. I think after the fiasco of that debate,
You're saying meltdown?
Labor is in meltdown.
You're saying meltdown?
I think the Greens are doing well. I think Robin Malcolm's attack on John Key was probably effective to people who don't like the National Party. And when you've got
Soft vote, though. They checked that Green Party vote. Soft vote.
I think that it is possible Labor is heading towards a sort of Bill English 2002.
Oh, that's
rubbish.
a David Farrar fantasy. Are
well,
you kidding me?
It's not, because I don't.
Well,
think even Bill
iPredict
English,
doesn't say
I
that.
don't.
iPredict
no,
doesn't
that's
say
why I'm
that.
saying it's a short.
It's
I
a
think
short.
it's a short.
It's short.
Yeah.
Thank you, panel. Let's move on to prediction 2. Despite Don Brash purging John Key to throw Paul Goldsmith under the bus and tell Epsom voters to vote for John Banks, Goldsmith's probability after heavy trading over the weekend continues to be 40%, dropped shortly to 35% of winning Epsom. David, you wrote on Kiwi Blog that John Banks' record of overspending and sending the Auckland City Council into debt was a large negative for a candidate running in an electorate that detests overspending, and Don's desire to light up the cherry and toke on the herb went down with John Banks about as well as a Hamas supporter at a bar mitzvah. Will Epsom voters do what they're told when John Key gives the order?
Look, you'd have to be barking mad to want to get ACT and Don Brash back into Parliament, and the Epsom voters aren't barking mad. So iPredict's right. ACT aren't going to get there.
Matthew, the UMR poll puts Goldsmith at 42% and John Banks at 28%. Even with David getting 19% and the Greens on 11, if the inevitable order to throw Paul under the bus comes in the final week, a combined residual national vote with the Greens and Labor could still beat Banks. How risky a strategy is it to tell people how to vote?
Well, look, I've lived in this electorate pretty much all my life, except when I've been working in Parliament and
This is
Wellington.
your hood. This is
Yeah,
your hood.
I mean, so I wouldn't presume to tell David about Dunedin, where he grew up and what he knows about. In the end, I think that this electorate and will do exactly what John Key
Really?
orders us. If he tells, it's a bit North Korean, but if
It
the
is,
Prime
it
Minister
is.
orders us to vote for ACT or National, or David, or the Communist Party, or the Aotearoa Cannabis Party,
They will
or John
do as
Key,
they're told,
we will
really?
do what we're told. This electorate wants a national government, and they will vote in the way that the Prime Minister says.
Can I say why I don't think that's right?
Let's hear it.
Too many people in Epsom, for a start, know that Banks tripled debt when he was mayor in his last term. But more than that, they remember that they voted in the perk buster, and then they were embarrassed that he was busted for perks. Then David Garrett added to that injury by being done for passport fraud, having and it was disclosed that he got a discharge without conviction and name suppression when he railed against both. People don't like that sort of hypocrisy. And then you bring in recycling of Don Brash, and actually Don Brash is the bigger problem for the people of Epsom
Quite possibly.
It's actually
Here's
not
the issue,
John
though.
Banks.
I wonder what decision the Prime Minister will make. I don't think he has made a decision yet. I think if it's the difference between him being Prime Minister and not being Prime Minister, he will order us to vote for John Banks.
Yeah.
But I think after David Cunliffe's catastrophic failure to advise Phil Goff properly on that we've just been talking about,
that's not.
I think National is now more confident than ever before that it might get that 48 or 50% of the vote.
You think hubris
and
is driving them
I
now?
think in the end, no, I just think it's a calculation that they think, well, we'd prefer not to govern with ACT. We think they'd probably agree. Most National MPs would agree with your assessment, David, of ACT's dysfunction. And if they think there's a chance of governing without them, I think that's what John Key would prefer.
So are you really saying, because I mean the people of Epsom aren't being asked just to hold their nose and vote, they're being asked trying not to gag and vote for a homophobic dinosaur like John Banks. Why would affluent, smart, educated folk want to associate with him?
Oh, it's just one tick, it only takes 5 seconds.
Okay, question of both of you. So glad it doesn't hurt you, Matt. 47% of those polled say Brash as leader of ACT worked out poorly. If ACT are voted out, what are the ramifications for the wider political landscape?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, how easy is it for a replacement party to the right of National to get up? No one knows. So I would have thought that it means that there's fewer choices for National in the future, and that's a negative. On the other hand, it's pretty hard to see anyone doing it worse than ACT is on the right of ACT. So, so there's a positive there for National if they can get up a replacement in the long term.
There's two potential parties to the right of National that should both be viable, especially with John Key's sort of extreme centrist approach. You know, you would expect there's a classical liberal right-wing economics party, and you would think there's sort of a Christian anti-smacking type party. You'd think they'd both potentially be 5%. And ACT tries to be both and turns out being neither.
You don't think the Conservative Party, New Zealand Conservative Party, might be able to pick that Colin Craig's new vehicle?
Too new. Too new? Too new, 1%. I don't think most people have heard of them.
Question to both of you. At 35% probability of Goldsmith winning, would you buy that stock because Banks is toast, or would you short the stock because Epsom voters will do what they're told by John Key?
Oh, I'd buy it. Because
You'd buy?
I think Key in the end is likely to try and tell the voters of Epsom vote Banks, but I don't.
Because they don't like that. They don't like that.
I don't think many of them are willing to this time, as shown by the polling.
You can do that with Labour Party because it's very hierarchical. Vote this way, but the National, they like to think for themselves.
Do you know on this one? I really don't know.
Yep.
I've traded the stock for many months now, and I've lost money each time. Whenever I think to buy ACT, National goes up, and vice versa. I think that
you can't hold.
Don't
tell me you're holding.
No, I don't want to trade in it.
You're out.
I'm waiting for the Prime Minister to tell me what to do, and I'll do what he tells me.
That's wonderful thinking for the individual. Adam Smith will be rolling in his grave. Thank you, panel. Moving on to prediction 3. The market is predicting that National have an 80% probability of winning in New Plymouth. With a strong candidate in Andrew Little, has the market misread the aspirations of New Plymouth? Matthew, I put to you that this is the best stock to short right now because the market is misreading the aspiration of New Plymouth. As a bustling, productive regional power, New Plymouth wants a representative with national profile to give them the dues they believe they're owed. Andrew Little is a political figure with that profile, whereas Jonathan Young's only contribution to date has been the ludicrous comment that the fictional Skynet from the Terminator movies was justification for draconian legislation to cut people off their internet connections. New Plymouth's aspirations are not being read by the market. Your thoughts?
Well, bustling, productive regional powers all around this country vote National. In fact, what's interesting is that if you think of Tauranga and all those sort of places, if you think of Labour currently, it's starting to be a bit weak in West Auckland. It holds no provincial seats whatsoever except for Palmerston North, and that's a university town. And Labour is increasingly becoming a party which is South Auckland, half of West Auckland, and then the bureaucrats in Wellington and east side of Christchurch and Dunedin. And it has no other representation anywhere else in the country. You'd have to say this is a provincial seat. It's going to go national.
Do you think they're misreading the aspiration? How effective is Jonathan Young?
Well, look, he's not the top flight national MP, and that's why it makes it so extraordinary how badly Andrew Little is doing. I mean, the thing is...
Well, he's not doing badly. He's just doing badly on iPredict. That's a different thing.
Well, also in the polls done by the local newspapers. So there's two views there.
David, if Labour cannot connect with provincial New Zealand, does it simply become an urban political party? And can it risk that conclusion where the provinces are one of the few sectors generating real economic returns?
No, we can't risk that.
Yep.
And I don't think we are irrelevant to provinces. And in your earlier list there, you excluded Dunedin. You know, Dunedin, Palmerston North, you know, we are strong in those provincial areas. We have suffered a decline in some of the other provincial areas.
Why?
Dunedin's not a provincial area, it's a vibrant city.
Why?
I think that some of the social agenda that we ran in the
2008?
in the 2008 election hurt us. You know, none of it's been rolled back because it was right, but nonetheless it did offend some of our traditional voters.
And you've been unfairly tagged with it, yeah.
Well, you know, I'm happy to take responsibility for that because actually we were right, and the National Party haven't reversed it, and in fact they voted for some of it.
That's right.
But I do think it hurt us at the time, and also you know, there was a tide against us. People wanted to change, and we'd been there for 3 terms, and maybe there wasn't anything more to it than that. People just wanted time for a change. I think that that you're going to see Andrew Little doing better than you're predicting in New Plymouth. I mean, New Plymouth is a strongly industrial town. You go to New Plymouth and there are more members per head of population of the EPMU than anywhere else in the country. So
that's because people work in offshore minerals that you want to stop.
Oh, that's rubbish, Matthew. No, we just don't want them to be mined in national parks. We're not stopping big bloody...
After the RENA, you've expressed concern about offshore oil.
No, not about all offshore oil, about deep sea oil. Don't you have a few concerns after the Gulf and our preparedness shown by RENA and
well,
even
all
the government?
I'm saying is in Taranaki, people, you know, it's a bit of a big call for Labor to be trying to put all those people out of work.
That's not a deep sea basin. Actually, you know, we've been drilling for oil and gas in the Taranaki region for decades, and we will continue to do so.
Oh, that's good to hear, because Labor in government was a good friend of the mining industry and the oil industry. I mean, there was a massive expansion of both those sectors.
Well, we actually started to run out of gas. We started to run out of gas, and so we actually needed to explore for a bit of more gas. Otherwise, the lights would have gone out.
I'll tell you why Andrew Little. It's interesting. You're not really talking Andrew up very much. But
no, I was. You just...
No, you were talking about wider issues. I think the reason Andrew Little is toast in New Plymouth is you look back at the last election. National won the party vote by 6,611.
Yep.
But what happened was Harry Dynhoven, he missed out by 105. Right. In other words, there were 6,500 people who voted National and Dynhoven. Now, Andrew Little might be a friend of David's. You might admire old Andrew Little. But unfortunately, Andrew Little is no Harry Dynhoven.
Well, here's the counter to that. While party vote for National has always been larger than Labour's, and we can go back. Harry Dynhoven, he held the seat in 93, it was larger in 96, 99, 2002 and 2005, showing the people of New Plymouth, while National at heart, have put the best candidate in to represent their
Andrew Little
How does Jonathan Young represent their interests?
Andrew Little is a local boy done good. He's a local boy. He was born there, he was raised there. He's done well, you know, he's risen to, he was president of the Labour Party, he's a very competent person.
And has a national profile. Jonathan
has a
Young
national profile, that's right. So I can't believe that you've got him rated as lowly as you have on iPredict.
I think it's an easy short. This is an easy short.
Look, there's not going to be 6,500 people who vote National and for the former head of the union movement,
but they have,
former union boss in Wellington. It's not going to happen.
Almost over a decade.
And no, they didn't. Harry Dynhoven was a local guy. He was strongly supportive of the oil industry, strongly supportive of the mining industry.
Well, so's Andrew.
He's now been elected. He's now been elected mayor. It was a personal vote.
Well, it shows that Jonathan Young's the aberration.
Well, I'm not saying Jonathan Young's a brilliant candidate,
he's
but
not,
he's a local provincial MP.
Yes.
And he's certainly going to beat the carpetbagger from the union.
Do you honestly think Jonathan Young can represent the people of New Plymouth better than Andrew Little could? Oh, Mr. Skynet?
No, absolutely. I think if it actually comes down to that question, I mean, who might be Prime Minister? I mean, you know, who might be the next leader of the Labour Party? Perhaps it's Andrew Little. I don't know, right? But in terms of who's going to have,
you've picked all 40 of us in Labour at different times.
In terms of who might have the bigger career in Parliament between Jonathan Young and Andrew Little, obviously it's Andrew Little. But who might do a better job as a local MP? That might be Jonathan Young, just like a lot of...
No, never. No,
I think you're misreading New Plymouth's
the people of Tamaki, for example, have actually kept voting for people like Clem Simic and and Alan Peachy, who died yesterday,
Yeah,
because those people decided they wanted a local advocate
Actually,
rather
Alan
than someone
Peachy's
who
very competent.
But
But,
who wanted to be Prime Minister.
Tamaki isn't New Plymouth. I mean, they've
No,
got
but
different issues.
why-
At 80% probability that Jonathan Young will win New Plymouth, is this a buy or has the market misread the aspirations of New Plymouth? What's your call? Would you buy or short this?
I would buy it.
You'd buy probably no. You'd want to short that.
No.
You'd buy Labor.
I'd buy Labor.
Oh, you'd buy Labor. You'd buy.
Well,
Labor.
I'd buy National even at 80 cents. I think
Really?
it's a dead cert for Jonathan Young, which is going to make that leadership struggle after the election even more interesting.
Well, I'm sure you've got views on that, Matthew. Thank you, panel. Let's wrap this show with final prediction. Matthew, your final prediction tonight is?
My final prediction is that after their election loss, I think Labor is going to stick for longer than we think with Phil Goff as their leader. I think he has shown himself to be far and away superior to, obviously, Cunliffe, who is now just damaged goods, David, Andrew Little, and even Shearer. And I think what Goff might do is do what Michael Howard, the Tory leader in the UK, did after he lost that election, and say, look, I am resigning, but let's have 6 months to reflect over this and have a proper process for choosing a new leader. And I think in the end David will win that, but I actually think Shearer would be the better bet.
What a poison chalice for him to hand over to you. God, you can actually taste the cyanide, can't you?
Look, I can. He's so good at this. You know, he's backed virtually every person in the Labor Party to be leader. Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
David, your
So
final
Who do you back?
prediction tonight.
My final prediction is about Otaki.
Yep.
I think that you guys have got that wrong. You've got Nathan Guy well ahead. I think Paul Foster's going to give him a good bet for his money.
Yep.
Very strong local candidate. I was down there with him campaigning. Really well integrated into all parts of the electorate. Very competent man. You know, background not just currently as a lawyer and on boards of schools, trustees of schools. Comes out of the freezing works, you know, came up the hard way, sort of person we need in Labor, and I think he's going to do better than iPredict is showing.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, David. To my final prediction, over the weekend, Nikki Kaye's probability of winning the Auckland Central electorate dropped from a peak of 77% to just 70%, while Jacinda Ardern's probability of winning steadily increased to 30%. Matthew Hooton said last week that every time Green Party candidate Denise Roche opened her mouth on the TVNZ7 backbenchers debate on Thursday, Jacinda picked up another 100 votes. At 30%, Jacinda Ardern was a great buy, but this morning, after some heavy shorting, she is down to 24% probability, which makes her an even better buy. Tomorrow night, I am joined for a special focus on political values between the Conservative Party leader and pro-smacking campaigner Colin Craig and the Mana Party candidate for Waitakere and initiator of the repeal of Section 59, Sue Bradford. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook accounts for all my latest election updates. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow, 7 p.m. for iPredict Election 2011, exclusively on Stratus TV. Until then, get trading.